Okay, how did the universe begin? I have no idea. How am I supposed to know? I look old, but I'm not that old. Actually, I'll tell you how the universe began. There were subatomic particles and some gases, and when the subatomic particles collided with the gases, there was this huge explosion, incredible heat, and from there, it all began. Now, I know you don't accept that as a good answer. And you didn't expect me to say that. Because you know that you can't start with two things. So if I'm going to explain how the universe began, it doesn't make any sense to say there were two things. There were these two guys, and they were like who invented sushi? Two Jewish guys who wanted to open a restaurant but couldn't afford a kitchen. How do you start with two? Okay, in the beginning, there were subatomic particles and there were gases, but which of the two came first? Then I know how it began. So imagine if we say, first there were only subatomic particles. They were eternal, they just exist. And then, that's it, that's the end of the story. If there's only one thing that exists, nothing will ever change. How could it? And that's why in the theory, you have to start with two things so that you have a catalyst, you can have an explosion, something can happen when they collide. But imagine there's only one thing. And then there's only one thing. It's the end of the story. Now, in Torah, in different places, we are given different reasons for creation. We're not told how it happened, but we are told why it happened. In fact, on the first word of the Torah, Bereshis, the first comment from the Medrash is for the purpose of Torah, which is called Reshis, and for the purpose of Jews who are called Reshis. So what is the first comment that the Medrash feels necessary? Not to explain how God created, because that's none of our business, but why, that we need to know. We need to know why we're here. So we need to know why he created the world. And there are a number of given reasons. For example, God is a king, and a king needs subjects. You got to be a king over somebody. Now, this is true once God took on the role of a king. It does not explain why he created the world in the first place. So that comes later in creation when God gets to the attribute of Malchut, which is the 10th attribute. Then he needs someone to be king over. But why does he need to be king at all? Which means royalty is one of the creations. So it doesn't explain why he created, it's telling you what he created. And the same is true with kindness. One of the reasons given for creating the world is that God is kind, and the kind need to do kindness. So he created the world to do kindness. Now, the obvious question, objection to that explanation is, God created us as a favor? This is a favor? If you really want to do me a favor, then do me a favor and don't create me, and I'll never complain. But here we have the same problem as with royalty. According to Kabbalah, God created kindness on the first day of creation. So if he created chesed, if he created kindness on the first day of creation, then how can kindness be the motivation for the creation? He created kindness out of kindness. So the Alter Rebbe gives us the answer from a medrash and says this really explains the origins of the universe. The origins of the universe is God's desire. God desires a dwelling place in the lowest world. Now that makes perfect sense, because if there was only one thing existing, where would change come from? It would have to be internally generated. It can't be the collision of two separate entities. So since there was only God, what caused a change that resulted in the universe? An internal combustion God desired. The problem with understanding the origins of the universe is that, for all practical purposes, the universe began as a zero. How do you go from zero to something? How do you go from not to yes? I understand you can go from 1 to 60. But from zero? How do you get out of the zero zone when you have nothing? So the trick to understanding the universe is, don't start with something and then enlarge it. You've got to explain how we go from nothing to something. That's why the best explanation is God has a desire. Now, to understand that a little better, what does God desire? If nothing exists, what is there to desire? You know, you never take your kids to a toy store. That's rule 102 in child raising. Never take your kid to a toy store. I take my kids to a toy store, and we walk in, and within seconds, they notice something on the top shelf. I need one of those. So I said, oh, that's so sad. If you had told me when we left the house that you need one of those, I would have brought money. But I didn't know you needed one of those. So I didn't bring any money. Why didn't you tell me when we left the house that you needed one of those? The answer is because you don't need one of those. You're not even sure what one of those is. So what does he mean when he says, I need one of those? I developed a desire for one of those. No, you didn't. If you really had a desire for one of those, you would have told me in the house. Now, when you walk into the store, one of those chooses you. You didn't choose it. It reached out and grabbed you. So you don't need it, it needs you. In other words, the child's desire was produced by the object only after he saw it. How could a child need a toy that he never saw? Make it even more difficult, how can a child desire a toy that doesn't yet exist? He can't. So when we say God desired a dwelling place in the lower world, it means the desire is generated by himself, from himself, within himself, not inspired by anything besides him. This is called absolute desire, or essential desire, or pure desire. Pure meaning no artificial ingredients. Or to put it in simple terms, this is him. This is him. So let me introduce you to God. This is the God who desires a dwelling place in the lower world. And that desire is infinite as he is infinite. It's eternal as he is eternal. It's him. Because there was nothing else. There was just him. So on the one hand, we say God chose willingly to create the world. But at the same time, this is him. So he couldn't not choose it. So was it a free choice? Or was he compelled? That's a little difficult. He compels himself to make that choice. Because nothing else can compel it. Because nothing else exists. So to say something compelled him, no, there was nothing. But can he do otherwise? No, this is him. This is him. So yes, it is voluntary, but no, it is not affected by anything outside of him. So this is him. To make this concept really beautiful, if we would try to understand, what is it that God is after? What did he create the world for? You'll be surprised by the answer. What did he create the world for? If you say kindness, that's not good. If you say royalty, no, that can't be. If you say to do us a favor, no thanks. The correct answer is, what did God create the world for? Nothing. God created the world for someone, not for something. Because he's missing nothing. What he wanted, what he desires, is to have someone beside him. So what was missing before God created the world? He was everywhere, he was everything, he was infinite, he was eternal, he was perfect. And being perfect, how could he need anything? Right? Wasn't that the question? If he's perfect, how could he need anything? The answer is he doesn't need anything. He needs someone. Why? I just told you. There was only him. See, we say it like it's a big compliment. Do you know that God existed before anything else and there was just him? What, is that impressive? Is that a talent? Is that part of God's greatness? No, it's telling you what was missing. There was just him. Yeah, and he's perfect. Right. And there's just him. What changed when God created the world? Now there's us. Now he has us. So what did he gain? No, not a what. Who did he gain? B'nai Yisrael. B'shvil Yisrael. Now, what is the difference between wanting something or wanting someone? If I want something, I'm not perfect. Because if I want something and I can't get it, then there's something lacking in me. But what if I want you? I just want you. I don't want to be the only thing in existence. I want you to exist also. And you don't exist. What am I missing? I want you to be in my life and you're not there. What am I missing? You get married. We'll talk about this. Tomorrow or the day after. You get married. You don't marry something. You marry someone. What are you missing before you marry someone? Companionship? No, that's a something. A tax deduction? That's a something. What are you missing before you have him? Or before you have her? The answer is, you're missing her. So if God can't have us, if we refuse him, we don't want to be his people, what will he be missing? Nothing. It's not a what, it's a who. He will be missing, we will be missing. So how does that make him imperfect? It doesn't. It makes him perfect and humble. Because being himself was not enough. How humble is that? You're perfect, you're omnipotent, you're eternal, and it's not enough. Well, what more do you want? Not more. Can't be more. When you're infinite, you can't be more. So, what does he want? No. Who does he want? So the creation of the world meant creating someone with whom he can have a relationship. So how did it start? The Torah, the written Torah, tells us it began when God said, "Let there be light." He said, and there was. When God said, "Let there be light," the earth already existed, water already existed, air already existed, and fire already existed, but it was dark and chaotic. So that's not really the beginning of creation. And that's why Bereshis is incorrectly translated as Genesis. Genesis means the origin. Bereshis means early in the origin, but not the beginning. Bereshis. Early on, God said, "Let there be light." But what came before that? So you look in Kabbalah, and you find out that before God said, "Let there be light," God thought about creating the world, because thought comes before speech. Now, before God thought to create the world, what precedes thought? Emotion. He felt like. What are those emotions? Kindness, severity, compassion. And that's why there are 6 days of creation, because each day was one of those emotions being expressed. So the first day was chesed, kindness. The second day was gvura, judgment. That's why everybody hates Monday. See, it all works out. What precedes emotion? You know The Secret? You read the book, saw the movie, The Secret? Wow, it's still a secret. It's that little book that says that what you say and think can change the world. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah? So I was speaking at a Chabad house together with one of the authors of the book. And he was saying how if you think positive and you project positivity, the universe will give you back positivity. If you think negative, the universe will... And afterwards, when we were talking privately, he said, you know, I say universe. Of course, I mean God. It's just not good for business to say God, so I say universe. Can positive speaking, words spoken, actually change the world? They say it does. The reason it does is because the whole world, the physical world, is a product of speech. Of course, God's speech. But if you add speech to it will affect the world because the world is a response to God's speech. God said, let there be, so there be. But there's something else the Torah tells us. How does God create the world on Shabbos? Isn't he a Shomer Shabbos? God observes Shabbos. So how does he create the world on Shabbos? Huh? There are prohibited activities on Shabbos that are performed by speech. For example, there's a horse connected or hitched up to a plow. And with words, you can get the horse to move so that the horse will be plowing. You're not allowed to do that. So with words, you can violate Shabbos, but not with thought. If you can make the horse move with your thoughts, you can do that. So the mentalists who can make things move with their thought, you're allowed to do that on Shabbos. Like there was a convention of mentalists. And a guy got up to speak and he taps on the microphone. He says, "Can you hear me in the back? If you do, raise my hand." So if you can do that with thought, that's permitted on Shabbos. God creates the world by thought on Shabbos. And that's why the world is holier on Shabbos, because thought is higher than speech. And because the world is holier, workday activities are inappropriate. Then God goes back to creating the world with words. On Sunday, you can go back to doing those labors. But what comes before thought? Emotion. What comes before emotion? Intelligence. What comes before intelligence? Will. Like you want to study a subject, you'll understand it. The will motivate your understanding. If you don't want it, then your mind is not going to get it. So will comes before intelligence. And what comes before will? Pleasure. Every will is motivated by the pleasure that this, whatever it is you want, will give you. So pleasure, will, intelligence, emotions, thought, speech, and then action. So when the Medrash says God desired a dwelling place in the lowest world, That is the highest impulse. There's nothing higher than pleasure. Now, what gives God pleasure? A dwelling place in the lowest world. Let's try to understand what that means. And the explanation is found in Chassidus. A man says to a woman, let's build a home together. Is he hiring her to be a carpenter? What does it mean when a man says to a woman, let's build a home together? It means let's get married. It means let's start a family, right? In other words, God is proposing. He's proposing that we be His. But when you're modest, you don't just come out and say it callously. You say, let's find a place for the two of us. So when God says, I want a dwelling place in the lower world, He doesn't hire us like contractors to build Him an apartment, although it sounds that way. The Medrash says, our souls are God's daughter. A little piece of God, God's daughter. God's daughter has to get married to a body and then goes to live in the world of bodies. So the Medrash says, God is very uncomfortable. And God says, to be without my daughter, not possible. Eini yochel, I can't. But to not let her get married, I can't. So what's the solution? The solution is, build me a sanctuary and I will live among you. Not in it, in the sanctuary, but with you. So the solution to the homesickness, to the daughter being far from her father, the solution is an in-law apartment. Build me a temple and I will live where you live. But that's only on the outside. If you think about it more personally, it's not I will live where you live. I will live with you, and that's why we need a dwelling place. Because if I'm single, I don't need a dwelling place. I can sleep in a dormitory. I can sleep in the yeshiva, sitting up, the way great scholars used to. So when do I need a dwelling place? When do I need a private place? If I have a private relationship. So if I have you, then we need a dwelling place. So it's not that God is asking us to build Him a place. He's asking us to be the place. Because He's not looking for a what, He's looking for a who. If I need you to exist beside me when I am the exclusive reality, how do I accomplish that? Well, the first thing is I got to stop being exclusive. So it's costing me. Like a marriage. I used to have my freedom. I could do what I want, come when I want, go when I want, start. If I have you, can't do that anymore. That's called tzimtzum. God has to restrict Himself. He can't be exclusive anymore. Then He has to hide Himself so that we have freedom of choice. Why do we have to have freedom of choice? Because if we don't have freedom of choice, then He just created a what, not a who. And He doesn't want a what. He wants a who. He wants somebody who can love Him back or hate Him back. Because if we can't, then we're just an object, not a who. So He has to restrict Himself, tzimtzum. He has to hide Himself, hester panim. He has to create evil, which He hates. He has to send, as we said in the Medrash, He has to send His daughter away from heaven to the lowest of the worlds. He hates that. He has to create a Yetzer Hara so that we're tempted to sin. He hates that. So look at what it cost him just to have us. And that's why it is perfectly justified and rational that we should give up our comfort and our exclusivity in order to have him. And that's what creates the instinct in a Jew. Not the decision or the choice, the instinct. How can I ignore him? Look at what he does just to have me. And that's just in creating. Then God comes to Abraham before his name is Abraham, when his name is Avram, and he's living in Iraq? Minding his own business. God comes to him and says, I need you. Then we're slaves in Egypt, minding our own business, or Pharaoh's business. And God comes and says, I need you. How do we get over that? How do you ignore that? So there's an instinct in us that makes it impossible to not show up at least on Yom Kippur. So I tell you, I'm getting the kitchen ready for Pesach in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And of course, the oven is changing, the sinks are changing, the walls are covered with aluminum foil, and my non-Jewish neighbor walks in. He says, what happened? So I'm getting ready for a holiday. He says, what's the holiday? I said, Passover. He says, what is that? I said, it's the anniversary of when we came out of slavery in Egypt. He says, when was that? Have you asked yourself that? When was that? I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. I said, it was a long time ago. I think before Columbus. Anyway, you want to be exact, about 3,000 years ago. He says, really? Get over it. That's the most rational statement I've ever heard. You haven't been slaves in 3,000 years? Enough already. He says the United States got its independence from England 200 years ago. So what do we do? A firecracker, a hot dog? Enough already. It's 200 years. It's been 3,000 years, and look what you're doing to the kitchen. Get over it. You don't even remember how to build a pyramid. That is such a good question. What are we doing? So if you listen to the Haggadah, we keep saying over and over again, we are so thankful. We can't get over the fact that God took us out of Egypt. So it's not that we're not slaves anymore. We got over that. We're lazy, spoiled brats. We're over the slavery. We can't get over the fact that God came to get us. It's almost like, weren't we supposed to reach out to you? You came to get us? How can you get over that? So there's an instinct in us that responds to God's obsession with us. He creates the world for us. How do you then say, can't be that callous? Make any sense? No, if it doesn't, we'll talk about it again next time. This is really important. So let's sum it up. How did the universe begin? It began as a desire in God that is essentially Him. It's pure divine, pure divinity. And that's how nothing began, as a desire. But not a desire for something. That's too abrupt. You go from nothing to something in one step. Can't do that. You go from no thing to someone to something. If you look at marriage, there's just me, and I'm perfect. So it's time to get married. Before I get any more arrogant than that. Marriage is to limit your arrogance. No. You get married when you're perfect. I don't mean literally perfect. You get married when you have that feeling, enough about me already. Time to bring another face into the picture. So you know you're ready to get married when you look in the mirror in the morning and you say, "You again? I know you already. Time for a new face." So now you're perfect, meaning you're content with what you've achieved. So if you're perfect, it's time to move on to someone else. But once you find that someone, and you marry that someone, then everything about that someone becomes important. Don't you harm a hair on her head. One hair? Really? One hair will upset you? I didn't know hair was that precious. Hair is not precious. Her hair. She is my someone. And the someone in my life, everything about the one becomes important. So once we accept God as our God, then all of a sudden Shabbos is important, kosher is whatever, every hair on his head is suddenly important. Why? Because this is my God. So now everything becomes important, but only because of who he is. So that's how the world started. A person is sleeping very, very comfortably. You know, one of those really good, deep, peaceful, restful sleep. Why, if you're in that sleep, why would you wake up? It's so good. It's perfect. Why wake up? So if there are no children, no rooster, and no alarm clock, why do you wake up? Not what wakes you up. Why would you change a perfect, idyllic condition where there are no problems, no worries, like God before he created the world? Why mess up such a perfect condition? And the correct answer for the human being, why do you wake up? Because you want something. God forbid a person loses all will, he might not wake up. Not even for Folgers. In other words, it has to come from an internal desire, not from an external place. So, the world began as a desire in God. Then the intelligence followed, the plan of creation, the vision, then the emotions. In fact, God did create the world to be kind and to be just and all the rest of that. And then to bring it down to the physical, he thought it into existence and then spoke it. And that's how this world now exists. The scientist is a prediction. The scientist of tomorrow is going to have to ask the why question. Not how did the world begin, why did it begin? Because the world is a product of a why, not of a how. The world is a result of a desire. And that's why Rambam says, after Mashiach comes, the only interest people will have, the only subject all human beings will pursue, is to get to know God better. How does he know this? Where is this written? The only way we're going to have peace in the world is if we figure out that the world was created by God out of a desire. Because the attempt at explaining the universe through a how or how long doesn't satisfy. So although the scientists are trying to avoid the why question, they can't avoid it forever. Because if you want to know what this podium is, you have to recognize that it is a why. It exists out of a reason, not out of a mechanism. So once you find out that the universe is a product of a why, if the world came out of a desire, your next question is, what does he desire? So Rambam is very confident that when Mashiach comes, all we're going to need to know, the only thing left to know, what does God want? What does he desire in this relationship? And a relationship can get deeper and deeper forever. Any of it make sense? Sum it all up in one sentence. God doesn't say, I love you. Because that's not impressive. God says, you I love. Do you see the difference? Not I'm looking for something and I hope you have it. It's not I love and I hope it's you. No. You are what I want. You I love. You I need. You I care about. You scare me. Because you might say no. So it's all about you, and then the things become important. So we have a very good model for a healthy relationship. It always starts with you. And the you gives things their value. My granddaughter was crying because her doll broke. The arm came out. So I sit down with her and I say, it must have hurt so bad. So she starts to laugh. She says, it didn't hurt. I said, how could it not hurt? The arm came off. She said, it's not a real arm. I said, how do you know? She said, it's plastic. I said, oh, of course, what was I thinking? A real arm can't be made out of plastic. What's a real arm? A real arm has to have a bone and skin. Really? A bone with some skin on it is a real arm? It's as pathetic as a piece of plastic. So when people say, Torah says God stretched out his arm, he doesn't have an arm. I have an arm. Yeah, like a doll. So when the Torah says God's arm, how are we supposed to understand that? And every rabbi will tell you, he doesn't have an arm. I said, then why does it say he has an arm? It's just, they don't know. There's no explanation. God has an arm, a real arm, a literal arm. You mean like mine? No. Did you miss the word real? We got it backwards. Of course it's a metaphor, but we're the metaphor and he's the real thing. Don't turn it around backwards. It's like he doesn't have an arm, but we do. I thought we were created in his image. So we have a pathetic little arm because we're a miniature, cheap copy of the real thing. So he has a real arm and we have this. When he stretches out his arm, it splits the sea. What splits when I stretch out my arm? The seam. But not the sea. Does God really speak? You mean like a human being? No, he really speaks. It's like he said, let there be light, there was light. I say to my kids, let's have some quiet. Nothing happens, even when I raise my voice. Because I don't really speak, I babble. God speaks. So we have to get that really clear in our minds. God is more real than his creation. Doesn't that make sense? If he can create it, he's more real. So what does it mean? It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor because Torah uses the same word for my arm as for his arm. Isn't that confusing? The answer is it's a metaphor. You know you have a right arm and a left arm? God has a right arm and a left arm. But his arm is real, not physical. The physical is just a miniature copy. So God's speech is real. God really gets angry? Yes, he really gets angry. You mean like me? No, you just lose your cool. You blow a fuse. He gets angry. God really has a desire? You mean like a human? No, like an infinite, eternal desire. Not like the kid who says, I need one of those. No, not like that. So if we're going to understand the origins of the universe, we have to know that whoever created the universe is more real, not less real. So when God says, I need you to do this, that's an awesome statement. If he needs it, it's an infinite need. It's an eternal need. It's an almighty need. Not like our needs. They come and go. What you needed 10 years ago, you're not interested in anymore. Ten minutes? Okay. I get a phone call, and I hate when this happens. I get a phone call from Israel. This man says, I have a serious problem. Can you help me? My 12-year-old daughter got it into her head that God is angry at her. And she's depressed. She's miserable. And we took her to psychiatrists, and we took her to Kabbalists, and we took her to the rabbis, and nothing's helping. And then he did what I hate. He says, here, talk to her. And he puts her on the phone. I don't know him. I don't know her. She's 12 years old. She lives in Israel. Talk to her. So I said, you think God is angry at you? She says, yeah. I said, I'm so jealous. She says, what? I said, you can do something to get God angry? You're 12 years old? What did you find, kryptonite? You can get God angry? When did you become so important? I'm so jealous. Her problem went away. Now she goes around telling her friends, God's angry at me. You? So even when we say God gets angry at us, isn't there a compliment in that somewhere? Really? We are that significant that anything we do can please you, or anything we do can anger you? It's not because we are so powerful. He's got an obsession. He's crazy about us. And it's real. We're going to talk about this on another occasion, but Kabbalah says, you know that famous statement, God said it is not good for man alone to exist? He was talking about himself. He's the man. And he's saying it's not good for man alone to exist. The question is, why does he say it? Why make a statement? Yeah, it's true. So he created the world, solved the problem. Why do you have to say it? So the Medrash says, when God said it is not good for man alone to exist, he installed into human beings a divine feature, that no matter how perfect you are, you're never content to just be you, like him. But if he hadn't said it, it would never become part of nature. So by saying it, he actually created this need that we have to have someone beside ourselves. Because it's a divine feature. If you really don't need anything, why bother with someone? We'll talk about that some more in the marriage conversations. But this is the ultimate reality of our reality is his desire. And of course, the Torah describes his desire. To be continued. Enjoy.
Thanks for watching. Click subscribe and hit the notification bell below for daily pearls of Jewish wisdom.